thought and much calmness as he speaks and teaches tonight. And I ask and pray that you would help us to be attentive and listen and learn this evening. And pray that you would be honored and glorified. In Jesus' name, amen.
I'm not sure what it's doing. It's my computer. But I'll just wait. Oh.
I don't think it was detecting your...
Yeah, but it was just, it doesn't usually spin around like that. All right, there we go. So tonight's topic is truth, and I have 2 slides in the beginning. Before we get there, I want to tell one of my favorite stories to tell. Well, there's 2 Uber stories my favorite. I'll just tell you the one. This during like the end of the pandemic, and I'm sure you remember when the president mailed you checks in the mail. It's a good day. Maybe had some consequences down the road, but it was kind of cool. So I was Ubering this guy, and he also was receiving, I guess, other payments for something, some entitlement payments. And he was talking. He said, I have $7,000 in uncashed entitlement, like for maybe Social Security or something. I don't know. It wasn't direct deposit for him. I was thinking, $7,000. And he said, my mom said I should give it to her. This guy's like about 50 years old. My mom said, I should have that money. And he's like, Mom, you don't need that money. And he wasn't sure what to do with it. And then he said, well, I was thinking maybe you could just give me a really, really big tip. But he did not give me a tip, I don't think. But I'm trying to remember all the details. But at some point he said, I should give it away. Like I should buy, I said, well, actually I said you should give it to somewhere like Water Street. If you really don't need the money, you give it to charity, people who are homeless or really, really need it, or really in need. Because there were a lot of homeless people in Lancaster at that time. And he said, oh yeah, that'd be good karma for me, something to that extent. I said, karma? And he said, yeah, I mean, that's how it is, you know. It's how it is. You die and you come back again as something else. You got to put some cash up there or something like that. Got to put some points on the board. I don't exactly know what he said. And he's like, you die and you come back and you got to really live a good life. And I said, really? I was thinking, really? I said, I don't believe that. I said something like, you know, the price is paid once and for all. Jesus Christ died on the cross. And I gave it a pretty, just like it was a 5-minute ride. So I just kind of told him straight, like, this is what the gospel says. And he says, paid once and for all? And he's thinking, he goes, you know what? That sounds a lot better than what I believe. I was like, yeah, but I don't really think he's really thinking seriously about what he believes. I was like, yeah. He said, and you don't come back again? You don't die and come back as something else? And I said, no. He's like, wow, that sounds like a much better deal or something. I was like, yes, it is. For about 30 seconds, he was quiet. And then he goes, sir, I love you. Heard a Hindu or Buddhist person on a street corner or at a cafe say, hey, everyone, or talk to you and say, you should believe in reincarnation. I don't know where he got that idea. It's not that common, but that was a pretty quick, probably just, oh, I received that. That's how it is. I don't know, but here we go. This is what we're talking about tonight, and I have a few readings. You see this optical illusion, and once I read this, this is Steve Turner. This is called The Creed, and you've maybe heard it before if you listen to podcasts or listen to preachers in the past, but I'm going to go through this slowly because I believe outside of Romans 1, it's probably the most accurate description of a lot of people in our world today, and probably for a long time. I don't think this is just like a new phenomenon where everyone's believing whatever they want. We believe everything is okay, as long as you don't hurt anyone, to the best of your definition of hurt and to the best of your definition of knowledge. We believe in sex before, during, and after marriage. We believe in the therapy of sin. We believe that adultery is fun. We believe that sodomy is okay. We believe that taboos are taboo. We believe that everything's getting better despite all the evidence to the contrary. The evidence must be investigated, and you can prove anything with evidence. We believe there's something in horoscopes, UFOs, and bent spoons. Jesus was a good man, just like Buddha, Muhammad, and ourselves. He was a good moral teacher, though we think his good morals were bad. We believe that all religions are basically the same, at least the one that we read was. They all believe in love and goodness. They only differ on matters of creation, sin, heaven, hell, God, and salvation. We believe that after death comes the nothing, because when you ask the dead what happens, they say nothing. If death is not the end, if the dead have lied, then it's compulsory heaven for all, except perhaps Hitler, Stalin, and Genghis Khan. We believe in Masters and Johnson. Listen to this part. I think this is it's so prevalent among society and how people behave. What we see, what's selected is average. What's average is normal, and what's normal is good. Okay? So if we select a bunch of people from the audience, from a group of society, and we find that they have a certain habit, perhaps they do something, they smoke, or they view pornography or something like that, we say, that is average, what's average is normal, what's normal is good. I think that's kind of the descent of our psychology in the past 100 years. I'm going to skip part of this. We believe that man is essentially good. It's only his behavior. We believe in the rejection of creeds, the flowering of individual thought. And then there's a final verse or part that goes like this. This is the critique from Steve Turner. He says, if chance is the father of all flesh, disaster is his rainbow in the sky, and when you hear state of emergency, sniper kills 10, troops on rampage, youths go looting, bomb blast school, it is but the sound of man worshiping his maker. And that is a great explanation of how people view truth in our society. And you might say, or maybe you haven't met anyone like that, but there are plenty of people. That is an illusion, like this never-ending staircase, that we can put together all sorts of different ideas. The universe will alter, history will change, and everything will fit our perspective. But of course, there is there's the counter perspective. This is the idea. I don't know if you ever heard of Christopher Hitchens. He died a few years ago of, I think it was I heard alcoholism, but a whole bunch of other things. He had cancer as well. He said this is his argument, and I think it's probably one of the strongest arguments I've heard against Christianity. Now, he believes in an evolutionary perspective. He says this. In the beginning, God created the heavens and the earth, and man sinned and fell into absolute corruption, disease, and all the misery that he could possibly ever experience. And then God stood with folded arms and waited for 100,000 years before doing anything. You're like, well, not 100,000. Okay, 4,000 years before doing anything, we could say. Is that true? Well, he would say that. Think about that. God didn't do anything to redeem man, he's saying, for 4,000 years. He just stood there with folded arms and says, good luck, I've left you all alone. That's pretty much his argument, but he says it much more eloquently, and it's it's not convincing, but you have to think. But when it comes to the sea of massive information, this guy, I don't know if you ever heard of the book Brave New World, Aldous Huxley. He said he doesn't fear that people will shut out the truth, that they'll cross it out, they'll burn the books, they'll shut down the libraries, they won't allow the Christian to speak. He doesn't fear that. Instead, he feared that in the coming generations, he fears that people will be drowning in so much information that the truth doesn't even matter, and they wouldn't even care if they found it. Winston Churchill said, there are some men who stumble into the truth and trip over it, then they look at it and run away. Like, truth is by definition exclusive. Like, if we find out that it's not good to do this, or I am actually in this condition as a sinner, it's very offensive. I don't like that. And so we don't want to look at that. And so we go to great lengths in the sinful mind to block that out. So has God stood with folded arms? This is our message to the world. Of course not. God has revealed. I don't know exactly what passages it states, but has not God said? I had a professor who went through, a secular school, I think it was Villanova or something, And he would listen to all this stuff, and he'd get so confused and all their tactics and everything, and then he'd think to himself, hasn't God already said? And yes, he has. So we don't need to go through the optical illusions or the delusions of what our world said. Very simple. We know that. Jesus said, I am the way, the truth, and the life. He is the standard of truth. He said the truth will set you free. That statement alone makes a whole lot of difference in our world today, or it fits in our world today. If your eyes are opened, you're converted, you can finally see who you are, who God is, and the exhilaration of your worldview being switched, of being saved from what we constantly say, misinformation. We're saved from all the lies. That is what the truth is. It will set you free. How has God revealed himself? Through burning bushes, through prophets. Enoch and Elijah walked with God and were no more. He appeared in the fire with 3 faithful men, and most of all, he appeared to men in flesh, preached the gospel, died on the cross, rose again in heaven. He is the central character of the story of redemption. He is the central character in the book that is most read. So, did God stand with folded arms? No, he revealed truth. To Noah, to all of these people from the whole way back in the beginning of the world until now, he's speaking and revealing himself again and again and again. It's the people who say, give me a sign, show me more proof, but they've already been given proof. It's that they don't want to accept it, so they'll believe the most ridiculous theory in order to get out around that. And that is a whole topic on itself. I love this quote. I'm just going to read a little bit of it. It's actually quite long, but I'm just going to read a little bit of it. Because when I study history, I like reading history. I love, for some reason, World War II and all the stuff and all the ideas, and it's very interesting. I don't know if you feel that way, any part of history. But you say, how does this fit in with the biblical, narrative, timeline? Well, here's the answer. What do we see when we look back on history? We see empires rising and falling, revolutions, counter-revolutions, wealth accumulating, wealth dispersed. One nation is dominant and then another. Shakespeare speaks of the rise and fall of the great ones that ebb and flow with the moon. But behind all of this debris, behind all the supermen and self-styled diplomats, there stands a gigantic figure of one because of whom, by whom, in whom, and through whom alone mankind may still have peace, the person of Jesus Christ, the way, the truth, and the life. Jesus stands behind all history because he is the measure of truth. It's not that it's not that Jesus has truth. It's that Jesus is the standard whereby you measure everything else. And Jesus is that truth. Pretty profound. Now, I would like to introduce a text tonight, Romans 1, and we're going to look at how we got to this place. It's not that we really have gotten anywhere, because when we fell, when the human race fell, and we sinned, and so on. What is the most accurate explanation of the human heart and the human progression of rejecting the knowledge of God? I want to say I believe Romans chapter 1, verses 16 and onwards. And I have that in the KJV in my notes, so if you want to follow along, I'm not sure what version you use. But before we read it, I was listening versus reality. God gave them up to that. Someone was talking about an elderly person in an old people's, doesn't sound right, old people's home, and she believed firmly in her heart that she was on a ship bound for America, and she was Irish. And she always believed that every day. She always believed that. And she did some of the most ridiculous things. She thought she was the queen of the ship or something, because she would kind of present herself in a way that she said, someone was describing to me, I'm showing off my worldly beauty, she would say, or something. This is nonsense. That's not real. She might have been Irish, but she wasn't on a ship to America. That's a delusion, right? Every sin moves us away from truth. So truth is reality. Like, people talk about, reality will slap you in the face when you walk away from it. Right, but everything is reality isn't something that is like a character in our story. It's what is. And when we depart from it by sinning, we make agreements and we we bind our mind and our will to certain lies, and we get further and further away from the truth. So if I have a story, it's pretty shocking in my mind. If I say that, you know what, I deserve everything that's out there, I should be rich, and I start to believe that, and I just steal things from people, I'm going to look like a person who's deluded, in a sense. Now, there are certain sins that perhaps we could say are more of a perversion of morality, you could say, or more of a perversion of your identity, more of that slowly change your perspective on the world. Let me give an example, because this is the best one I can think of. There was this man who was riding in Uber, of course, and he said, we passed a political sign right before the election, and it had a certain political name, and I honestly didn't really know much. This is a candidate for senator, and he said, that man is bad. He's going to release criminals. He's going to release pedophiles, and something like that. I was like, oh, that's probably not true. If that were true, he probably wouldn't be able to run for Senate, because that sounds like a really immoral and ridiculous thing. And he said this, under his plan, those people get only 11 years in prison, and I got 20. I was like, ooh. What are you thinking right now? You're thinking, what did you do? I wanted to know right away, but rest assured, he told me in 10 seconds. I was so glad. But then I wasn't glad. I wish I don't know this. He said, it wasn't fair. I was in for 20, and I didn't do anything nearly that bad. I just set a fire. I tried to set a fire. Yes, there was a family inside, but I shouldn't have got 20 years. It's like, you could have killed them. You could have killed, 4 people or something like that inside that house. Is that a delusion? Is that a departure from reality? Is that an agreement with so many lies about yourself, the size of your ego, or the importance of who you think you are, or a perversion of justice where you think you should be let off easy for trying to, as an arsonist, to try to burn down a house? That is not reality. That's delusion, okay? And God gives people up to delusion. That man was given up to delusion. I've heard of other people say that, well, Jesus told me I should engage in that. And I was like, that's not true. And the person next to me, we were talking to this man on the street, he said, that might be true. God may have said to that man, you want it? I will give you what you want. Or go ahead, I release you. Okay. It's like a child who says, I want to do something and it's dangerous, or I want to lean over the railing on a zoo or something and look at the lion, and she's going to topple over or something like that. And she goes, oh, I want to do it so badly, let me go. And then the parent's like, no, that's ridiculous. But there are some occasions where you might actually let your child do something so they learn the hard way. Like they want to, I'm trying to think of, I'm not a parent, so I can't think of an example right now. They want to play with something or lift something or touch a hot stove. Let's say that's a ridiculous example. We won't let them do that. But let's say you get so tired of that child asking to touch that or whatever that you let them go. And what do? They burn their hand, they come running back to you, and you say, you're never going to do that again, are you? Say, no. And that's kind of, in a very small way, what I think Romans 1 is saying. And it's incredibly destructive and sad. I think there are people who say they're enamored. They're living in a delusion in this sense. I'm standing here and I think I'm in the kingdom, on the edge of the kingdom, or I'm being tempted to leave or to go that way. And I look over there, and sometimes I almost feel this way. Look at the world. I look at the, maybe whatever you see the world as, fine suits or a certain nice cars, really nice cars. They pull up and you go, wow. I remember seeing a guy in the city one time or whoever. And I went, wow, that is pretty cool. That guy has an interesting lifestyle. I wish I had a more interesting lifestyle and a better car. And then I see plenty of people having a great time eating at these restaurants and living this kind of life. And honestly, you could be deluded in thinking, that's where it's at. That looks amazing. And you're not in reality. In that sense, you're thinking that you're somehow you're leaning over in this direction. Eventually God lets you go and you live that life, and finally, like the prodigal son, you come home. But not everyone comes home. And in a sense, this is speaking about the whole human race, but it's also very individual. And that's the key, I think, about this. It's the individual we're talking about, not just the whole of humanity. Now, I want you to react to this if you don't like it. I've heard many times since I was growing up, America better get its act together. Have you heard that before? They better stop what? Like abortion. They better put the Bibles back in school. They better stop homosexuality. They better elect a Christian as a president and all these things. Otherwise, what? The judgment will come. Is that true? Maybe the judgment is coming because they have sinned, and it's just a natural outworking of that sin. Even then, it's kind of interesting. A country will fall like Rome, at a certain point, Rome was a total mess around the year 100, and it was falling in a sense because of its sin in its highest ranks. It was a mess, let's put it that way. But this preacher, John Piper, said, receiving in themselves a due penalty for their error, it was in them they received that error. The person who engaged in worshiping the creature more than the creator, they got the wages of that in their own life. And in the New Testament, I think it's fair to say nations are not addressed like they are in the Old Testament. It's like the Assyrians or different countries, the Babylonians. They're not addressed. It doesn't say, land of Greece or things like that, because we have physical kingdom and a more spiritual kingdom in the New Testament. That's a different subject. That's my perspective. With these two things in mind, we're going to read Romans 1, and I'm going to start at verse 16. Paul says, "For I am not ashamed of the gospel of Christ, for it is the power of God unto salvation to everyone that believeth, to the Jew first, and also to the Greek. For therein is the righteousness of God revealed from faith to faith, as it is written, the just shall live by faith. For the wrath of God is revealed from heaven against all ungodliness and unrighteousness of men who hold the truth in unrighteousness. Because that which may be known of God is manifest in them, for God showed it unto them. For the invisible things of him from the creation of the world are clearly seen, being understood by the things that are made, even his eternal power and Godhead, so that they are without excuse. Because that when they knew not God, they glorified him not as God, neither were thankful, but became vain in their imaginations, and their foolish heart was darkened. Professing themselves to be wise, they became fools, and changed the glory of the uncorruptible God into an image made like to corruptible men, and to birds, and four-footed beasts, and creeping things. Wherefore, God also gave them up to uncleanness through the lusts of their own hearts, to dishonor with their own bodies between themselves, who changed the truth of God into a lie, and worshipped and served the creature more than the Creator, who is blessed forever. For this cause God gave them up unto vile affections. For even their woman did change the natural use into that which is against nature, and likewise also the men, leaving the natural use of the woman, burned in their lust one toward another, men with men working that which is unseemly, and receiving in themselves that recompense of their error which was meet. And even as they did not like to retain God in their knowledge, God gave them over to a reprobate mind to do those things which are not convenient, being filled with all unrighteousness, fornication, wickedness, covetousness, maliciousness, full of envy, murder, debate, deceit, malignity, whisperers, backbiters, haters of God, despiteful, proud, boasters, inventors of evil things, disobedient to parents, without understanding, covenant breakers, without natural affection, implacable, unmerciful, who knowing the judgment of God, that they which commit such things are worthy of death, not only do the same, but have pleasure in them that do them." So, I'm going to proceed. I think I don't want to jump ahead, have this in order. The greatest analysis of the human problem, the human heart. And we're going to work through this, beginning with, by their unrighteousness suppress the truth. There are two truths that I have here on one of these slides that men know and cannot deny. We'll get into that. By their unrighteousness suppress the truth. Now, you probably had seen a beach ball and a person or a child pushing it down to the water. It actually takes a considerable effort to suppress that truth, right? So there are people who know the truth, who know parts of the truth, and who have to suppress it. I think there are people out there who have no knowledge of the gospel, but I also think I know of at least one person who has full knowledge of the gospel, but has to put so much effort into keeping that suppressed. Because otherwise, they would have to fall down and accept that gospel. So they will go and believe whatever theory, whatever nonsense it takes for their mind to be still under the slavery of sin. So they don't have to. They don't have to accept that, or they don't want to, of course. Whoops. Anyway, this is the first truth. And this is very important. This helped me. It gave me so much more. It gave me confidence, at least, talking to non-Christians. Because they know about God through what we would call general revelation. His eternal power and divine nature have been clearly perceived ever since the creation of the world in the things that have been made. Every person has within themselves, whether pagan, growing up in the middle of nowhere in a tribe in South America, the whole way to a person in a metropolitan area who's rich and working in a skyscraper, everyone has a sense of God. So I don't necessarily have to approach you and work exceptionally hard to try to argue you into my ideas about that there is a God. Think about that. There are a lot of people who will give arguments for God. I think those arguments are best for growing believers to reinforce their idea of what they already know. Because all sinners know that there is a God. They may suppress that, they may lie about it, they may tell you they don't believe in God, but in the end, I truly believe, because they look around, they see all of the creation and everything, you can't possibly deny that someone put that in order. So, you have to come in with that sort of understanding, and if they say there is no God, the first question is, why do you say that? Second question is, what would it take for you to believe in God? Or what kind of evidence would it take? What kind of evidence is admissible to your courtroom? Because a lot of people say, well, show me the evidence. And you say, well, look at creation, or look at my personal experience, or look at this, the morality, and all these arguments and philosophies. And they say, that's not acceptable because it's not scientific. Okay, well, if you don't admit any evidence that isn't scientific or that you don't like, you'll never believe in God by that term. Like you're putting a box around what's natural. But I can tell you there are a lot of things in life that are outside of that you do every day, from the love you show, if you love someone, or you know morality and all those things. There's many tangents here, but everyone knows that there's a God. The application in the end will get to some of those questions, but I want to give you a story, and this will probably help you understand. At least it helps me think through these things. I don't really understand when it says in the Bible, it says something about evil or about people suppressing the knowledge. You really don't get that until you see it face to face with someone who's actually doing that. There are a lot of passages in the Bible, at least for me, that I didn't really get or understand until I saw it actually face to face in another person. This story, I told this at my church once, and I related it in kind of a funny way, because I grew up, little did people know, because I kind of lived inside my mind at times, that I had lots of big questions. And all children probably at some point lie on the grass in the summer and look up at the sky and look as far as they possibly can to see if you can see God, and you can't. Or they might ask like really strange or deep questions at a young age. Maybe your child. Sometimes children will show wisdom that might surprise you. You think too much, perhaps, or you think a lot about things. And I met someone like that once, and he was talking about how he thinks about, whether there's a God or not. He thinks about how can we know what's actually true? Can we know things for certain? And he's talking about all these sort of philosophical things, and he's relating to me a perspective of the universe is so big, but I don't see God. It just feels so hollow sometimes. And I'm like, it does. I mean, sometimes it does feel like the universe is all out there, and the stars and everything, and it's just a big, giant, empty space. If you're a Christian, you might feel like that sometimes. And I related to him. We had this long, very deep conversation. And I was like, okay, where is this coming from? Where do you come from? And we kind of got down to that. He was growing up at a church somewhere, I think Scranton. That was the place he grew up in. Scranton, and he said, I went to church all my life, And then I went to college, and I'm not a Christian. No. But he's not sure. He's lots of questions, but he doesn't think he can really know. He said he went out to eat with his mother and family, I guess, and they're sitting there at the table, and they look across the table, and recently they had moved. They had moved 2 hours away, I guess, from where they originally lived. And they left that church. And they looked across the restaurant, and there was the pastor from that former church. He walks up to, his name is Bruce, the guy I was talking to, walks up to Bruce and he hands him a tract. What do you think that tract said? A sign from above. Exact words he had said. And I know this because he pulled out his wallet and he showed it to me. You've carried that for 3 years and you're not a Christian? Or something, 3 years, something like that. And he says, you know what he said to me? And I was trying to be compassionate and understanding. I was like, this is amazing. I wasn't willing to actually say the blunt truth, which I wish I had. He said, what does it mean? I was stunned. I was like, well, it means God heard you and he revealed truth to you. It's a sign, like 100%. You know for sure. You can take it to the bank. There's a God. And he said, I just don't know what it means. I just don't know, he said. But he was sad because he did know. He had this sense of sadness. He had a great job. He worked for Universal Studios, believe it or not, and some sort of animatronic I didn't understand. And I remember feeling like we had a lot in common in sort of our discussion, but here we broke off. And it felt like suddenly we were a million miles apart. The conversation ended, and it just seemed like he was in this place where he chose to be in his mind. And he gave me his cell phone number, and I think it was a few weeks later, I called him, and I could hear in the background it was very loud and sort of, I don't know what I was hearing. It sounded like a party or something. And he was a different person. Like, he's like, oh, hey, yeah, all right, yeah, man, whatever. He's not going to talk. He's not sad. He's not receptive to anything. He doesn't want to talk. He's good. He's good now. He's with his friends. He feels fine. I don't need you. How much energy does it take for him to suppress that knowledge? I haven't even had that in that sense, like a physical paper or anything like that physical being shown to me that God is, revealing himself to me. How much energy, how much guilt, how many sleepless or loss of sleep does it take to push away that sort of conviction? A lot. You're thinking, I was thinking, oh no, I should have said something like this. That is so foolish. So that guy still looks out at the universe at a giant empty void, but he worries a lot. I was thinking, I prayed, I think one time, dear God, don't let Bruce sleep. Don't let him sleep. I want his life to be either miserable or I want him to be convicted until you say, all right, have it your way. Anyway, haven't heard from him, but it was a very interesting time. All right, I got a little ahead of myself, but here is our general revelation. Is there a God? And you could talk about creation and evolution. That's such a complicated and arguable subject. I don't like to get into it because I don't know all the science. And also, people can say, well, I just don't believe that. That's kind of what happens. But there are some gaps in that story where something came from nothing, where living things came from dead, non-living things, where, plants and various things turned into, how shall we say, families, and where morality came from animals. That doesn't make sense. And there's also things like, on a leaf, I learned this in a biology class, there's symbiotic relationships where one kind of bacteria or organism cannot live without the other one kind of being there too. It's how? No, there's no way chance did that. I mean, if you don't want to believe it, then I guess you will come up with some ridiculous theory. Oh, wow, okay. We're almost through. Yeah, we only have, this is pretty much it. Two things, we've already said this to a degree. Man knows what is right, and man knows there is a God. Does man feel guilt? Yeah, he hides it. He doesn't want to, he might apologize for doing something in front of a Christian or something. People know right and wrong. That's not hard to understand. But people, I think, at some point, addicts realize this. An honest addict will realize something else is happening here. It's not that I just go to alcohol. It's not that just I get to enjoy drugs. It's that I have to. I don't have a choice anymore. It's not about the enjoyment. I must go over there, and I must do it. Emily, anyway, she said this in a long poem. It's just a short excerpt. She says, "Dreadful is the check, intense the agony, when the ear begins to hear and the eye begins to see, when the pulse begins to throb, the brain to think again, the soul to feel the flesh, and the flesh to feel the chain." When the sinner feels the chain of "I have to." Perhaps there are moments in a sinner's life, I would imagine, under conviction or in an addiction or something like that, like, I am not the master here. I'm not the one that's walking the dog, so to speak. Something else is leading me around, and I'm not truly in control here. I think that's so important. And man knows that there is a God, so that they are without excuse. All right, I don't think I'll go too much further. Here are our list of questions I didn't get to. Well, I combined that from last night. What do you say? What do you say when you don't know what to say? You just ask questions. I was teaching Kazakh last week, and one guy said, "Oh, I don't know if I can respond to that because I'm not a genius yet." So, "You're never going to be a genius in this subject." "I'm not." "But you can do what?" He asked questions. The guy in the back of the room say, "How do you know that?" How do you know that? If you don't know what to say, or someone makes a claim, you're like, they say something about quantum physics or something, quantum physics, I heard this somewhere, quantum physics, which I don't understand, proves freedom of will or something like that. It's something ridiculous. And I would be like, how do you know that? Do you see it? I don't understand that. Does life have any meaning? How can God exist when there is so much? These are the questions they may ask, but these are the questions that go from the head and connect to the heart. Is there anything after death? Is there any truth in religion? But most of all, that bold one is for us. How do you know that? What led you to believe that? How do you know that the earth came about that way? Well, in high school, in a biology class, I was taught that. And that's where a lot of people will say the world came from. They will say, that was pretty much exact words. How do you know that? And where did you come up with that? Where are your sources, and so on? You believe the earth is flat. Have you seen it? All those things like that. And those are our questions. Tomorrow night we will talk about how meaning, and we'll talk about suffering the following night. And last night we'll kind of address some other things. So those are the questions. What are your questions? Yeah, so I'd say that obviously you're going to start with the conversation in their mind, and then you're going to ask questions like, how do you know that? And when you get to that foundation, they're suddenly at a worldview level, like a basic fundamental belief level, which I didn't talk about here, but like there are founding beliefs. Like you have founding beliefs. Jesus is the Son of God. Obviously there is a God. There's such a thing as morality. There could be 100, founding beliefs. But you don't think about them very often unless something out here is a contradiction and it's in your face and you think, how is that possible? What do I truly believe? You can come down to that, and eventually it will come to the will. I don't know if you've ever had a conversation and suddenly you see the person kind of turn away or kind of get uncomfortable, like really uncomfortable. That's when the person has begun to think on the basic level of, what do I believe? Why do I believe it? And in that sense, how it all works, I'm not sure, but the will, it's ultimately going to sway the opinion. Even if they know something, they'll deny it. I mean, there are people who, like, So there's a man named David Berlinski. He's probably the smartest atheist in the world. But he also says things like this, which are really honest. If you're an atheist, you're not even in the ballpark of finding meaning in life. There's not really morality as you want to think about it, and there's not really any point to a lot of things you think have a point. But then he also says things like this. The guy in the room said, all right, let's talk about morality. You do believe in some sort of morality? He said, yes. And they talked for probably a long time, eventually got to the very bottom of the subject, and they say, so how do you know what is right and wrong? You know what he said? You just do. And he thought there was nothing wrong with that. But he knows the truth. Like, he has studied everything in every, probably major university he's spoken about how there isn't a God. Yet he knows there's a God, and so he has to accept what we would consider academically suicide would be to get in front of an audience and say, why do I believe this? Or why do we believe? You just do, and step off the stage. That's a ridiculous argument for him to make. So we do choose what lens we look through the world, and that is the determined by the will. There's been a lot of how should I say? There's been some worldview changes. Some people in kind of not media, but there have been people who have looked at the world and say, this whole movement, they might be in a movement, they say, this doesn't make sense anymore. There's nothing about tolerance anymore. I can think of a few people in the podcast world, I should say, who they look at that and they say, this isn't tolerance, this is pure hatred and power grabbing. And they kind of, they switch their perspective. But they don't just choose one fact to change, they go wholesale the other direction. Because you can't just change one fact and not have contradictions. You have to change entirely to a more, these people change to what we would call a traditional natural law, which is what? I know what is right and wrong. This is what's right and wrong because I know that. I'm going to kind of rest on that. And in that sense, they've given up a lot of delusion. They're not Christians, but they still, in some way, the inconsistency in their face, where there's no truth, they go, what do I really believe? And could it all just be a lie? So I thought that was interesting. I'm going to speak my truth, or I have alternate facts. That was a thing for a while in a previous political person. I have alternate facts, or I'm going to speak my truth, means we're all in this, but what are we really doing here? We're pulling and pushing, or fighting over power, because when there's no objective for truth or morality, it's all a power struggle. You follow that, that's not my idea, that's observations of other people. People say they're being kind and tolerant and moral by extending this sort of compassion to people. They're narcissists, or they're centered on themselves, and they're just moving different groups around to gain power for themselves. Because if there isn't truth, there isn't morality that's fixed. It's all a power game. And that's really sad and kind of what culture is today. All right. Anyone else? All right, well, thank you for your attention and comments.
All right, well, thanks again, Nick, for speaking. You gave us a lot to think about again. So, a couple of things that Nick said is, the mind follows the will. Do you believe that or not really? It definitely has me thinking a bit. And also, man knows what is right, and man knows there is a God. There's definitely a part of me that wants to disagree with that, but I'm not sure why. And I think that's because, like when you talk to people that, say that act like they don't know what's right, or there is nothing that is right, or there is no God. It seems like they're very convinced in their mind, but yet it's interesting how, you were just bringing out that there's still an underlying truth in people that they know that they know